the moment our fellow geeks, dweebs, nerds, and other unfortunates have been fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerfherder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker, and Christina Yojimbo Henry. You can continue. And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
Okay. Welcome to TMI Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. I'm Christina.
I am Jeff.
And I am Jim.
If you've never listened to this show, this is us.
That's right.
Yes. I think you could probably figure out from our intro who Christina is, but maybe you were kind of confused as to who Jeff and Jim are.
Interchangeable. So this is a slightly different format. This is the TMI.
This is going to be hard for me, though, to separate because, first of all, this is like Doctor Strange in the multiverse, because not only did I deal with the book and the new version, I watched the 1978 version. Ooh. They are completely three different things. So my mind is spinning at the moment.
I also rewatched the Peter Ustinov version because you mentioned, and also it was in Criterion. So I was like, I'll just watch it again. I haven't watched it in a long time. I was reminded how much I'm not that nuts about Peter Ustinov's.
But you see, because of him, they used to show this Death on the Nile that I remember seeing quite a bit, because in my head, I've always pictured Peter Ustinov. So I've always pictured Poirot as a, rotund little guy, even though he's not very little, Mr. Ustinov.
Oh, see, I had the opposite because I listened to the audiobook.
Right.
And David Suchet plays him as this very minute, quiet, doesn't really he's an observer. And he doesn't really say much, very soft-spoken. And it isn't until the end that he kind of he grabs this boisterous, flamboyant, I am a Hercule Poirot and I dissolve everything. It was much different than Kenneth Branagh's take on this.
So I just want to talk about this for a minute because
do you want to talk a little bit of news at all? Because I know we're breaking format, but I just wanted to acknowledge Ivan Reitman. We just got the new Ghostbusters a couple months ago from his son, Ivan Reitman. This guy is a legend. You can't talk. He did some directing, but his power was in producing Animal House, Ghostbusters we talked about, Kindergarten Cop, Beethoven, Space Jam. This guy still had multiple projects in the pipeline at 75 years old, including 2 Ghostbuster projects, one an unnamed animated show or feature, and a Stripes TV show, by the way. But I just wanted to give him props before we move on. So sorry, I didn't mean to hijack this. I know we're already in it, but Ivan Reitman, 75.
So what I wanted to mention before we get going is that I don't know if you guys are aware of how much Agatha Christie I have read, listened to, watched, and just generally been immersed in. You guys probably don't have the same degree of fandom that I do.
No, but that's, I think, part of why we're doing this is to bring light the original source material with the books. And after listening to this first book, I can easily see how you can get sucked into this woman's world, because the book is very well put together. I enjoyed it immensely. I remember these books all over the place in my mom's house, but I never wanted to read about murder mysteries. I could barely hold my own against a Scooby-Doo episode.
Well, when I was young, I always read mysteries. Like I read Nancy Drew and I read Trixie Belden. I read the Hardy Boys. And
did you have the blue hardcovers, Hardy Boys? I had the entire series.
The ones I usually checked out the Hardy Boys from the library. The ones I collected were Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden. I loved
I don't know
Trixie
who that
Belden.
is. Trixie.
I was obsessed with. And that like it's a very natural progression from if you're a young girl to graduate from like Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden into Agatha Christie books. So I've been reading these since I was a kid. As an adult, I've reread all of them more than once. But more importantly, I listen to the audiobooks all the time because I'm a huge fan of the ITV Poirot series, in which David Suchet played Poirot and Hugh Fraser played Hastings. And all of the audiobooks are read either by Suchet or by Hugh Fraser. So for me, it's like listening to Poirot and Hastings read the books to me. And some of these books I absolutely have memorized. One of the interesting things for me when I watch a film depiction is I try very hard actually not to compare to Suchet, because for me and for a lot of people, Suchet is Poirot. He did it for 25 years.
Yeah, 89, 2013.
Well, I'm glad that I had no reference to him whatsoever.
That's kind of like watching a James Bond when someone else takes it over. You can't help but compare it to who came before.
Yeah, all I had was Ustinov in my memory. That's all I had.
But the interesting thing is that sometimes the criticisms of other depictions are like, oh, well, they made changes to the story. And I just want to say up front that in the Suchet versions, now obviously he's just an actor. He didn't write the scripts or make the creative decisions, but a lot of those stories were actually changed from the original stories, and some of them to a point where they're almost unrecognizable. So I don't want to go out and say that like that series was so perfectly loyal.
Was absolutely,
to the,
100% accurate.
To the original source material. But what stands out about that series is his performance, which is so indelible. And he really, really captured, I think, the sense of who Poirot is in the books. What Ken Branagh does to bring it to this film is that he takes a slightly different tack. He makes him a little younger. He makes him a little more active. But I compare it to Downey's depiction of Sherlock Holmes in the Guy Ritchie version of Sherlock Holmes, which is that's a completely different interpretation of those stories. That's a completely different kind of depiction of Holmes. And it's perfectly fine and it's perfectly valid, I think, to translate these in a different way for a modern audience. I think that's what Branagh is really trying to do.
And it should be pointed out that not only is he acting, he's directing this film as well.
Yeah.
So he has got full creative input on this, not only as an actor.
He made a couple of decisions that, as a fan of the series, overall, as a Agatha Christie fan, were slightly questionable for me. The first thing was that he had this scene at the beginning where Poirot was in the trenches in World War I.
Yes, can you explain this?
Yes.
Does Agatha Christie ever give an origin story to his mustache?
That's exactly what that is.
So she never gives an origin story to his mustache because he just is very vain and he's proud of his mustache. But
that is a mustache you can't stop looking at.
But the other thing is, it's very important to note. So The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which is the first appearance of Poirot, that came out in late 1919 or early 1920. And it's actually set in 1916. It's set toward the end of World War I. So this is the first appearance of Poirot. He's an old man, or at least a late middle-aged man, who's a Belgian refugee. He was never in the trenches.
In a war. Wow.
He was never a soldier. He had been a police detective in Belgium.
That's a huge creative license right there.
I was like, but okay, I'll take it. I understand what he's trying to do. Again, I feel like this is very similar to the way they reinterpreted Holmes, and actually not just in the Downey version, but even in the TV series with Benedict Cumberbatch. It's just like a slightly different kind of depiction. I'm like, okay, I understand. But the biggest thing that got me was at the end. I understand the point they're trying to make, that Poirot has quote unquote taken off his mask, but Poirot would never shave his mustache.
You couldn't even grow a mustache on those scars.
I didn't like that whole flashback. And I think Poirot is a strong enough character where you don't need to give him a romantic interest or try to humanize him in some way. I think he's fascinating anyway.
Like that. You know, that he was just, and again, comparing, only listening to the audio of Death on the Nile, all the main he's not a main character. He's just kind of a fly on the wall that is observing all of this. He's quote unquote on holiday. And I get it. In the movies, he is center. Everything revolves around him. He is part of every conversation, every action that takes place. And I didn't like that because all these other characters that become suspects or whatever kind of take a back seat.
Yeah, I agree. They're to the fore in the book, and it's such a rich palette of characters in the book that it's really fascinating. And I can't wait to do this again. This concept that we're doing here of taking a movie and then looking at the book and talking about it, because it's fascinating to me what they change and what a studio or a director feels needs to be changed in order to make it speak to an audience. Like, and why they would think that something in the book wouldn't translate well to a film, and the 78 version does it as well. Why I'm saying it's like the multiverse of madness is because there's things in the 2022 version from the book that don't make it into the 78 version and vice versa. So, what was the thought process there?
Well, I think the first thing off the top is like both versions cut down the number of characters.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah.
And
they merged certain characters together, and they got rid of my favorite character. What's his name? Tim Allerton. They replaced him with
Book.
Yeah, with Book, who was a character that carried over from the
Murder
first
Murder on the
Orient Express movie.
They changed Book's character from the book into that film version, the Ken Branagh film version, because Book is close in age to Poirot in the book, and here he's like a character who's much younger. And I can see why, because I'm sure the thought process was, well, the audience already kind of knows Book,
knows this character,
if they've seen
if they've seen it previous.
He plays the same role. He story wise he's
the same function as Tim Allerton.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
But also Colonel Race he becomes. Yes. But while David Niven in the 78 version is Colonel Race, although he's not looking for the terrorists that he is in the book, he is the lawyer character, who is Jim in the book.
Jim Fanthorpe.
Yes.
Right. So like Ricchetti is cut from both versions. And so like once you cut Ricchetti, you almost don't need Race, because the only reason he's there is finding
Ricchetti,
this character.
Although I love the code in the book with the vegetables. I think that was a joke that was missed from both of the movies.
This is completely missing humor. I don't think there's anything amusing about this. I remember in listening to the book multiple times, chuckling to myself. The only laugh I got out of the movie is after Lynette is killed and her body's in the meat locker, and Poirot goes out of his way to fix her foot. So, and it's funny because in the movies it's established he has this OCD. I didn't pick that up in the book at all.
Oh no, that's present. That's part of his character. That's sort of throughout. He lives in a perfectly symmetrical apartment.
But in the book, I don't remember him ever being in an apartment. He was on holiday.
Right.
So.
In Death on the Nile, you don't get to see it as much, but it's an ongoing aspect of his character through all the books.
Okay.
Is that
But they did play this up in the movie. You saw it with the cupcakes or whatever, the desserts are. Even when he's sitting in front of the pyramids in Giza, he's directly in the middle with the two on either side. He's got the little tables. He's got the two eggs, which I understand is a carryover of his personality, trying to find a perfect size egg. So stuff like that. I like that. I really, 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 really enjoyed Suchet's portrayal of this character. And then finding out after the fact that he has played this character for years and years, it makes me want to go and watch these.
It's so much fun.
The audio book, and Lucky, you recommended it because, I don't necessarily have the time to sit down and read a 300-page book.
Right.
Although I'm doing it right now with our next book, which is Christine. Listening to the audio was fascinating because he plays every character and he does a voice for them.
Yeah.
And it is such a joy. Now, I'm driving a truck. I'm trying to work. It's different than listening to a radio or listening to a podcast where two people are talking about something, usually Bigfoot, and actually trying to keep track of the story because you get invested in it,
right?
And I got to pause this stuff, but it's 9 hours long is the audio.
Well, I've always shied away from audiobooks, and I didn't listen to the audiobook here because I sometimes feel I get robbed from the voice that I want to create in my head for the character.
Yeah, I see that. But, with my limited time, like I see that now reading the book that I'm reading. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But this, again, he's doing the French accents. The female voices, the male voices. It was just a delight. It was an absolute delight.
There's certain books that I actually prefer to listen to in audio. Because generally, if they're read by an actor, I prefer actors to people who are like professional audio book readers, because they perform the part, and I really enjoy that. As a side note, the Rivers of London series by Ben Aronovich is read by Kobna Holdbrook-Smith, and I've never actually read one of the books. I've only listened to them. Some of the characters have these very regional specific accents that I never would be able to imagine on my own. I need to hear them because I'm an American and I don't know every single tiny regional accent. So that's actually, sometimes it can be a benefit to listen to the audio to counterpoint Jim's point of view here. But yeah, in the book, in both versions of the films that Jim and I both watched, the 78 version, Cornelia Robson is cut from the film. And it makes sense because you can sort of incorporate her into Bowers. But that's unfortunate for me because I actually like Cornelia's character arc in the book, because she goes from this character who's really beaten down by her cousin, Miss Van Schuyler. At the end, she sort of stands up to her cousin's bullying. She stands up to Ferguson's bullying, and
she's
like, I'm just going to marry Dr. Bessner, and this is what I want to do.
And she was missed. She was missed in both film versions because she was one of the standout characters. I agree. And also Jim Fanthorpe. He's missing as well. So
you can sort of see it in a film. It's like, well, people have a lot of characters to keep track. And does it make sense to bring in this British lawyer of Lynette's who's there basically to keep an eye on Andrew Pennington?
Yeah, they kind of replaced him with the cousin, right?
Right. In the Ken Branagh version, he's, instead of being Uncle Andrew, he's her cousin Andrew,
right.
Who's there and who sort of does the same thing, kind of embezzles her money and then tries to cover it up by having her sign a paper that he thinks that she'll be distracted on her honeymoon. And of course, being Lynette, she won't be. Because
this is the biggest thing for me. I did not like Lynette as a character in the film version at all.
She is likable in the book to a degree.
She's high-handed, right? So she's not a villain per se, but she's a person who thinks she's doing the right thing, but she does it in a very high-handed way. But what she does to Jackie it's terrible. And Jackie
set her up. They set her up. I will say. Okay.
Jackie says that she, at the end, when Jackie's sort of giving her unrolling of what happened in the book, this happens, you get this, you don't get this in the film. But Jackie says, I would have hesitated to do this if Lynette had not deliberately gone after Simon. She says, from the start, Lynette turned all her charm on Simon, even though they had this plan in mind, right? The reason why Jackie didn't regret it was because Lynette acted in such
she took the bait
way. Yeah.
And almost 80-year-old, spoiler alert, we are going to reveal who the killers are in this episode.
Okay, before we go any further, I just want to say I actually pay attention to these podcasts. I listen to what we talk about because it was around chapter 10 that I said to myself, it's Simon. Simon is doing this and he probably has an accomplice, because if Scream taught me anything, there's always two of them. And Deputy Dewey said straight up in the last Scream movie, never underestimate or overlook the love interest.
Right.
But it's a matter of, all right, well, if he did do it, how the hell did he do it? Because it's a very convoluted, and I am happy that they kept this intact as far as their motivations and what plays out. But it is very convoluted whether or not this could actually be pulled off. It's not for me to decide. Hopefully
you're already familiar with the story if you're listening to this, but it's Lynette Ridgway and then she becomes Lynette Doyle. This whole thing revolves around her and this boat trip on the Nile. And she has stolen the fiance of her friend, Jackie. And his name is Simon. And when we're introduced to them on the boat, they're already married. And Jackie is out of the picture. So we think she's been trailing them on their honeymoon. And this creates a lot of drama. And the other passengers in the book, some of them are attached to Lynette. Some of them are just there. Right. But in the movie, the cast is really pared down. They're all there for them. So, of course, they all have strong motives. And it is Lynette who ends up dead. She is the victim here. And Poirot has to solve the mystery of who killed her.
I am Poirot. Is the greatest.
Now, events transpire. Simon, because of this lover's triangle, Jackie has brought a little .22 pistol on board with her. And she's tempted. And we know because Poirot gets her aside in the book and in the movie and talks to her because he realizes what she's trying to do. She reveals she's got a gun. So there is a confrontation in the bar. At one point, Jackie pulls the gun. Lynette's already gone to bed and shoots Simon in the leg. So he's pretty much taken off the table from that point on as a suspect because he is, hobbled. He can't walk. He can't do the things that the killer has obviously been doing. So your attention is supposed to be taken off of him until some stuff is revealed at the end. So getting back to the central couple here of Lynette and Simon. Now, again, looking at the 78 version, and I apologize, Jeff, because I know you didn't see it, but I just want to bring this up real quick. I watched that last. Read the book first, then saw the 22 version, and then that evening watched the 78 version. Looking at the 78 version, knowing, of course, who the killers are, at the very beginning of that movie, you see Jackie and Simon driving to Lynette's house because Jackie is going to introduce Lynette to Simon to give him this job of, looking over her estate. And they're talking like, oh, I'm nervous. Oh, you'll be fine. They're not talking. They're by themselves. Yeah. And they're not talking at all about killing her or the plot or anything else. So it's completely purposely trying to throw you off to take suspicion off them. And that felt really cheap to me. Like that should not be in this movie. If they're plotting to do this, they should be talking about it when they're alone in the car.
The other thing that the 78 version does, I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, don't apologize to me. That's fine.
Is that it makes Lynette much more unlikable. Like it sort of paints her as she's a straight jerk. Like, you really don't like her in the 78 version.
Jeff, I just want to point out that Lynette in the 78 version is played by Holly Goodhead from Moonraker, Lois Chiles. Yes.
Interesting.
To bring it back to the book, Jackie is set up from the start almost before, actually, it is before you see her, because there's this thing that Agatha Christie does, and she does it in all of her books. And I can never tell if it's a product of her British insularity or if she's mocking British insularity, but she always talks about these passionate continentals as if they're like aliens from another planet. Jackie's half French, so like she's very intense. She's Latin, and once she stabbed a boy. That's one of the first things you learn about her. Lynette tells the story to Joanna Southwood. Jackie actually later, she kind of mocks Simon's English reticence in the story because she's making a scene, right? And he's saying, "Oh, Jackie, go to bed." But the characteristic thing that you're supposed to know about her from the start is that she's passionate. And of course, she would be capable of committing a murder.
Did it leave a little bad taste in your mouth, some of these things that Christie would say, in the voice of her characters, obviously? Oh, she's Latin. She's very passionate. It's kind of writing them off as stereotypes.
She does this. I mean, she does do it a lot in her books. And it's like I said, it's never really clear to me, like if this is her point of view or if she's sort of mocking that very, very British point of view.
Right. That this is the character's point of view.
The interesting thing about Agatha Christie is her second husband, Max Mallowan, was an archaeologist. And a lot of her books are actually set in the Middle East. And she has, for a person who's probably traveled quite a bit, right? She traveled to all these sites that Max Mallowan went to. Again, her characters at least have this very British outsider view of the places that they visit. They don't become immersed in the culture, right? They sort of view it from the outside in this very British way. And I never really, like I say, I never really know, like, is this her sort of mocking the people that she sees traveling to these places and, encountering other cultures this way? Or is this her own point of view? Because she does this with other characters. There's a Spanish character in Hercule Poirot's Christmas who's sort of treated the same way, like, oh, she's passionate, she's Spanish. So like she could stab you because she's, like
she's got that Latin blood,
Yeah.
like this alien from another planet, or like the way Mr. Ricchetti is depicted, again, because he's Italian, right? So he's like,
well, I would think because of the time that not a lot of people are traveling unless you're well-to-do to begin with. So you probably do have those stereotypical views of certain people from other cultures that you just don't understand.
What I'm saying is that she did travel a lot, so that's why it's sort of interesting to me. And she does sort of have these types in her books that recur over and over. So I do feel to a certain extent that she's observing, types that are around her, and that she's communicating that. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why, Jackie is a suspect from the start, because obviously anyone can act like that, right?
They want her to be the number one suspect. That's the way it's being set up.
And the other interesting thing to me is how they set up in the movie this nightclub scene to be all important, with all these characters converging.
Well, that's just it.
In the
taking
nightclub
all
scene.
These different, like I was saying before, where in the book, all of this stuff plays out and you as the reader are the observer, but Poirot is nowhere to be seen. He is front and center in this room, taking all of these conversations and dialogues and actions in, like he's absorbing it.
And a very X-rated dance scene as well.
Yeah.
Between Simon and Jackie. And
that's a little right off the bat. She's like, "Oh, look at this man."
I was embarrassed because my son was sitting right next to me, and
an older couple in front of me, and I was embarrassed.
And so then Jackie says to Simon, "Go take Lynette for a dance to show her thanks," and he immediately picks her up and puts her crotch in his face. Like, is this how this guy?
That's how I think my boss every day.
As a side note, I have to say I feel a little bad for Kenneth Branagh, who, like, with his 2 Poirot films in a row, casted an actor who ended up having a major scandal. And I don't know if it's true or not, but it felt to me like his part was trimmed. Like, you didn't see as much of Simon.
No, once he got shot,
film.
he was out of the. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, he's.
And I wondered
anyways,
if afterwards, because he's present throughout the book in different scenes. Like, people are always going into Simon's room to talk to him,
and he's always commenting on the events going on. And
right. And so I was like, did Branagh make a decision afterwards to trim that part down to like the bare minimum?
Although it may, maybe he didn't. Maybe he's trying to take suspicion off of Simon by not showing him a lot. So,
but it definitely felt, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I feel like he's hardly in this movie and he's supposed to be a main character. So I didn't know if it had anything to do with outside events. But yeah, the other interesting change I thought was, so in the book, Salome Otterborn is a romance novelist, an alcoholic. not necessarily an unlikable character, but you feel very sorry for Rosalie, who cares about her mother, but her mother is like a loose cannon. She actually reminds me of Eleanor Lavish in A Room with a View. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Oh no, my wife will appreciate that reference. Thank you.
Eleanor Lavish is a novelist who's always, talking about passion and all this kind of stuff in A Room with a View. It's just, Salome Otterborn reminds me very much of that character. But when she gets killed in the book, you feel bad for Rosalie, but you don't necessarily mourn that character because she's not a super likable character. And I could see how they made this change for the film. There was no way you could have Salome Otterborn be the third character that's killed because she's such a likable character. And also, again, they were trying to trend towards something that was more personal for Poirot. So
right. They have the romantic interest. That was not happening with Angela Lansbury in the 1978 version.
Speaking of Angela Lansbury, this guy's like the world's #1 detective. If I saw him on a boat, I would go the other way because just like Jessica Fletcher, every time this lady shows up, someone dies. It's like, you know what? I'm done. Yeah, I'm going home. I'm not hanging out with you, dude.
A critique I read of the new film is that half of it is set up. Well, half of the book is set up too.
Lynette does not get killed until 3/4 of the way through the book.
To introduce all these characters and to really be familiar with their motivations, and to be fully engaged in the story, there has to be a buildup. You can't just throw these characters in and then just start from scratch.
Yeah, no, I actually thought that in the movie there was less setup than in the books.
And you don't have as much opportunity.
They kind of rush.
You don't have as much opportunity. It's the problem of film.
The book is, the audio is 9 hours long.
Yeah.
You're now taking that and condensing it down to an hour and a half, a 2-hour movie. Mm-hmm. So it's two different mediums. I will tell you, the audio book for Christine, because I looked it up, is almost 22 hours.
Yeah.
To distill that down to a 2-hour movie is almost impossible. You, by nature, are going to lose something.
You do. You just lose that sort of time where you're getting to know every single character so well in the book. Yeah,
because I felt in the movie they spend too much time with Poirot. We know he's going to be the hero. We know he's going to... I like the way it was built and set up in the book.
Yeah, I expected no less of the movie. Really, I expected that Poirot in the movie would be the central figure, stronger, right?
Yeah, everything is seen through his eyes. Everything.
And you have to do that because, again,
correct. I agree.
The attention of a film audience is like, well, who should I be following?
Yeah, right.
Who should I care about?
Like you said, we've already pointed out that certain characters have been condensed down, and 2 characters condensed into one. So you're cutting down the cast as it is. But yeah, there's a lot going on. Do we need a jump scare with a snake
and a crocodile?
And a crocodile for that matter. I like the crocodile scene, actually. Can I just point out that they actually filmed this in the UK? This was not filmed in Egypt at all.
Yeah, which contrasts to the 78 version.
They were never once on location in the 2022 version?
No, they rebuilt that. Oh, they rebuilt that. No, the boat was stationary. It ran on tracks underneath the water.
Wow.
Maybe moved like 20 feet. It was barely seaworthy. But they rebuilt the Temple of Ramses II on location. They built just the very bottom of the pyramid, and then they went out and they shot second unit plates.
I would never have known that.
Not at all. Nope. So very impressive because you are there. Although there wasn't enough sweat for me.
And speaking of another embarrassing moment, talking about the Temple of Ramses, the close to fornication happening behind the statues.
I don't think UNESCO will let you get away with that. It's a World Heritage Site now. You can't be having sex on the pharaoh's head.
The other thing, and I feel like maybe this isn't as present in the film, but certainly in the book, there's these different. This is very characteristic of Poirot. He becomes fixated on like a small thing or like a series of seemingly small things that will become very important. And I think this is Agatha Christie's idea of fair play. Like she's showing you clues, but you're not privy to Poirot's thought process because he has to have his monologue at the end where he unspools everything. So at different points, Poirot points out different things. And then about 3/4 of the way through the book, he lists off like this series of things to race that are very important to him. His bottle of wine, the stole, the 2 bottles of nail polish, the stained handkerchief. And so you're kind of like, okay, like what does this mean?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
But it's important that that stuff is shown so that you see him later when he's drawing out all the connections. Like, the bottle of wine was important because I have this bottle of wine every night with dinner, and that goes back to a comment that Mrs. Allerton makes in the book, right? Like, we're very Catholic in our tastes. Every night you have your wine and Tim has his whiskey and I try different kinds of mineral water. And Poirot's like, oh, and then Mrs. Allerton's like, what? And he's like, oh, nothing. Yeah. Just a thought,
just a little note I'm going to stick around.
As he twists his mustache, just a thought.
Yeah. I did like he did pull a Columbo at one point, and he was like, one more thing. It's just like, what?
I think the thing that makes people really like Poirot, this is sort of interesting because Agatha Christie grew to hate Poirot. She hated
because
him
of the success, or just
she just grew tired of him as a character. And
did she ever try to kill him off?
No, she said she was not like, because Doyle grew to hate Sherlock Holmes too. He tried killing off Holmes and everyone got mad at him. And
imagine if you had to write like 20 Alice novels, maybe by the 20th, you'd be like, I don't want to do this anymore.
You're getting an Annie Wilkins on your case. You dirty bird, you bring her back.
I completely sympathize, but she actually wrote Poirot's death in the novel Curtain, and she stipulated that she wrote it very early in her career and she saved it. Curtain comes out in 1975, like shortly before Agatha Christie herself dies. So she saved it as her last book. She would never kill Poirot until the very last book. The very last book she would ever publish would be Poirot's death. And she set it up that way so that it would be the last thing that would ever come out, because she said she felt she had to write what the public wanted. People wanted Poirot. She wrote other series. She wrote Miss Marple. She wrote standalone novels, but she would never kill Poirot. It would be her very last book. And then she wrote it like 20 years prior to her own death. Like, she had this sitting there waiting. Poirot, while not beloved by his creator, was so beloved by the world that he is the only fictional character ever to have an obituary on the front page of the New York Times.
No, wow.
Yeah. So
well played, sir. Well played.
Yes, well played. Now, you see, if I was a character in Agatha Christie, especially the murderer, I wouldn't kill the maid or Mrs. Otterborn. I'd kill Poirot. He'd be the first one I'd take out.
Well, they had the opportunity by just drugging his drink, and then he could have been done.
Right there.
Right.
And again, this is a little bit of a stereotype that Christie does frequently. It seems like some minor French character is always trying to blackmail somebody. This happens also in Cat Among the Pigeons.
And here it's the French maid. And that's a stereotype in itself.
She's got to wear that outfit all day.
I think that the puzzle is really well done in this. The way she establishes the puzzle and the way she does try to divert suspicion away from different characters. And I did think it was very funny in the film when Book says he accuses everyone of murder, and he's like, yes, it's a problem.
It is a problem. But
that is what he does in every book. He establishes to every single person, this is how you could be the murderer.
Everybody is a suspect. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. To him, everybody is a suspect.
That's what I hate about my wife loves those CSI shows, and I can't stand it because everyone's a suspect, and they all get into the interrogation room and they all talk back to the cop. They're like, yeah, you think I did it? I hated her. And I'm like, no one talks to the cops like that. I'd be like, dude, I didn't do it. I'm telling you right now, I didn't do it.
Watching a movie that's based on a book that you've read, it's a completely, of course, goes without saying, totally different experience than coming in fresh. And I was a little bit disappointed that I had read the book and I knew who the killer was, because I'm thinking, would I suspect, if I didn't know from watching the Brana version, that it was Simon and Jackie? I knew, of course. So you look at Jackie like, oh, look, it's written all over her face in the nightclub scene. I'm like, would I think that if I didn't read the book?
If they change, they went like Clue and like changed the ending. like and made it somebody else.
But then
It wouldn't have been the book, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't have been
true
Death on the
but, you
Nile.
know, they do a lot of different things. I will tell you the most impressive thing about this movie, Russell Brand.
I know, almost unrecognizable.
Unrecognizable.
He's doing the Minions voice. What's the doctor's name in the Minions?
Gru? Oh no, the professor. He just
the professor. Yeah,
Dr. Nefario.
Nefario.
Yes,
He's totally straight up Nefario in this.
He's got one voice. But yes, I did it. I'm looking at this guy going, he's just really weird looking in it. Like it wasn't until the end that I realized it was him. And I'm like,
I was
all right,
happy.
well played. Good.
Happy to see Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders together, which is as it should be.
I did enjoy them in this. The fact that Gal Gadot does this little Cleopatra thing, I thought was funny because isn't she set to play Cleopatra in the Patty Jenkins movie?
Yes.
Is that a nod or was that just a happy coincidence?
I don't know. I'm guessing it may be a happy coincidence, but maybe both. Who knows? Listen, you're in Egypt. Why not?
Yeah. I was very surprised to see that the 78 version was a lot more bloody. The gunshot especially was very ugly on Lynette in the 78 version.
Yeah.
It's pretty bloodless. Now, I'm curious, your son, what he took away from this, Jim.
He was taken by the story. He didn't never ask me once, how much more does this have, which he sometimes does.
Sure.
But so I asked him on the way back, well, who did you think it was before they revealed? Because I said before the movie started, you know, this is a whodunit. So part of the fun is trying to figure out for yourself who the murderer is along with the detective. So I asked him, who did he think that the murder was? He's like, I was convinced it was the mother, played by Annette Bening. Yeah. So
her red paint did go missing.
It's interesting because my son, of course, growing up in household with me, he's been exposed to Agatha Christie since he was pretty young. He's listened to quite a few of the audiobooks. He's watched a bunch of the episodes with me, when we saw the Ken Branagh film, which came out a few years ago, so he was a little younger. And I remember it was so cute because he leaned over to me and he was like, I wonder who did it. Like he was so
like he was really invested.
He was so in it. And but during this film, there's a reference to The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which is my son's personal favorite Christie novel. And actually, I think it was her favorite novel of Poirot that she ever wrote. Poirot starts talking about, I want to have this cottage the middle of nowhere. And so I leaned over to Henry and I was like, and grow vegetable marrows.
There you go. And that's exactly what he does.
And 2 seconds later, he was like, and grow vegetable marrows, because that's a reference to Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So we were kind of excited by that. That was a little thing for the Christie fans there. We had watched the 78 version before we saw this, and my husband was watching it and he had no idea who the killer was. So you were talking about how you think it's really obvious, Jim, but I think it's not necessarily, like, to a first timer, you know, who the killer is at least in the first film version. But my husband also said flat out that he said, I can never figure these out, so I don't even bother to show my homework.
Yeah, no, like I said, I get stumped on a Scooby-Doo episode every now and again. It's like,
oh my gosh, and Jeff, 1978 version, Simon is played by Manimal.
No.
Simon McCorkindale. The Manimal himself plays Simon in the 78 version.
Mia Farrow is Jackie. It's quite a cast, actually, in the 78 version, because George Kennedy's in it, Betty Davis, Maggie
went to the
Smith,
airport afterwards.
And Jane Birkin, for all the Serge Gainsbourg fans out there, plays the French maid.
She of the famous Hermé Birkin bag. But that's what they tried to go for here. I mean, they have a very high profile cast.
Yeah.
It's sort of like what you do with these films. But, you know, it's interesting if you watch the Suchet Poirots, you will see every British star that has become like a huge deal in the last 10, 15 years. They pass through the Poirots. They either show up on Poirot or on Marple, one or the other. You just see everybody. Literally everybody on those shows. It's so funny.
You know, it's funny, I know this movie came much later than these books, but I couldn't help but think of Knives Out and appreciate that more, knowing the history of these type of whodunits, because I really enjoyed that movie a lot. And that's another one that, you know, you're left guessing who it is. But Yeah, I enjoyed the book way more than I enjoyed the movie.
Knives Out is in the sort of same spirit, it's like that country house spirit. But the benefit of Knives Out is they don't have to, you don't have anything to compare it to. You're not feeling like some whack like you are here.
Right. And the interesting thing about, bringing this to the big screen now is the inclusiveness of a lot of the characters and some of the changes in that respect from the book. Like we were talking about, Mrs. Van Skyler and Nurse Bowers are now lovers in the new movie, when it was just a crotchety old lady and her nurse in the book and in the 78 version. Cousin Andrew as well. So there is a diverse cast here and that speaks to today's times. That could be seen by some as a very, very welcome update, and maybe by others as not so much. But I think it needs to be, in order to have this out, in today's climate.
I was going to say, that's what I mean when I say there's a bunch of changes to the Holmes character in the Guy Ritchie version. And that's pretty much what Branagh's trying to do here, right? He's trying to update and refresh this character and people around him, for a modern audience. It's not going to be an exact transcription of the book. It's not going to be exactly the same. But also, like I always say, if you love the book, you always have the book. And you can go
it's true. That is
read it
true.
again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So as a fan, and say this one, I don't know how it did at the box office. I don't know how Murder on the Orient Express, but obviously it was well enough received that they did a second one. If they were going to do a third, what would you recommend?
So for me, my personal favorite book, I think, is Cards on the Table, but I think that's not really filmable. That one more and they actually did a terrible version of it in the Suchet version. They made all these changes, and I was like,
well, you just said it's unfilmable.
What did they do? Because it's basically interviews. Really, the book is like Poirot talking. So it's hard. I think it's hard to translate that to film. Right. I think Evil Under the Sun is one that would be perfect, or the ABC Murders. Personally,
that's a more palpable title, by the way. Like Evil Under the Sun. It's like sounds like a Walking Dead sequel.
But again, like Evil Under the Sun, they sort of would have the same problem that they have here, where it takes place. Poirot's on a holiday, right? He spends
a lot of time on holiday. Huh?
He's retired. He
always gets drawn back in.
But yeah, even when he's on holiday, he seems to, or the cases find him.
That's why I'm saying, if I saw this guy in a nightclub, I'd be running the other way. I'm like, just nothing but bad luck follows this guy. People get killed wherever this guy is.
But Evil Under the Sun, he's on a holiday. He's on this little island. There's this large cast of characters. There's like these interpersonal dramas. I think it's, again, like a case where the ultimate resolution is not something that you see coming. I think like it has a good puzzle. So, and also, by the way, audiobook read by David Suchet. So if
there you go.
Suchet. I'm going to have to listen to this guy now.
He's so good.
I actually wrote a review on Audible books after listening to this, and said that Suchet was a real killer because he slayed it.
Oh,
he is delightful.
So let's bring in a confessional question of sorts. If you had a quibble with the 2022 movie in terms of how it compares with the book, what would the biggest quibble be in terms of a difference?
The shaving of the mustache. It's not right.
First of all, there's no way. When you see the scar before, at the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie, and then you see him with the mustache, there is no way that mustache is covering that scar all the way across his right cheek. Physically, it just wouldn't happen. If you had a scar like that, you wouldn't even grow facial hair.
I want to hear what you guys think, but surprisingly, I think in the end, the film is actually truer to the book than maybe at first glance, because it does follow the bones of the story.
Yes.
Really well.
Yeah, and they do keep the motivations and everything intact. I will tell you that in the book, Jackie comes across as a much more sympathetic character. She has multiple conversations with Poirot, and at one point, and I think it's before they get on the boat, the Karnak, and she's opting to follow them. And he tells her point blank, if you go down this road, you are losing a piece of yourself. I can't, I'm
He says, don't let evil into your heart.
Paraphrasing or whatever. And that's missing from this adaptation is this more personal connection that he has to some of the suspects. Again, he's sitting there in the middle, and he's just kind of overseeing everything. And then he just starts pointing fingers at the end. Where here, he's having a heart-to-heart with her, and he is telling her straight up, what you are doing is not only damaging your friend, your former friend and your former fiance, but more so yourself. This is a path you do not want to go down. And he's given her every opportunity. Obviously, we know now that she's doing it for nefarious purposes, but she comes across as sympathetic and almost can't help herself. The opening when she first comes to Lynette and she's like, I am so in love with this guy. I love him. And she just gives this passionate speech to Lynette, like how he's a nobody. He doesn't have any money, but he is my world. And that to me is the biggest thing that's kind of missing from this, is kind of like that heart.
And as you say that, it kind of gives another insight into Lynette's character, something that she doesn't have. The girl who has everything doesn't have this, what Jackie has.
When you have money, no one is your friend.
So that's why she wants Simon so badly, or part of it at least.
Yeah, if my friend Jackie is head over heels with it, what's he got to offer me?
And what do you think was missing, Jim?
I think the nightclub scene was ridiculous in the movie. The whole Dirty Dancing thing, I just almost laughed out loud when they were dancing. It was too much.
It's too much too soon. Like they literally just met, and it's like, so like Jim said, he's literally lifting her.
It was ludicrous. That was ludicrous dancing. To me.
But I did like the soundtrack. That is missing from the book, which is this jazz, bringing this band along, and you have the soundtrack behind you the whole time. I did like that.
I did think Sophie Okonedo was great as Salome Otterborn. But again, you get to that point and you're like, well, they can't possibly kill this character.
No, right. Yeah.
She can't possibly be the witness.
But it was surprising that they chose Book to be the one that gets shot in the neck as well. That was just as surprising, I think, as it would have been for Mrs. Otterborn to be killed in this new version.
It's real interesting to me is about the way that scene is written in the book, because Agatha Christie doesn't follow sort of conventional narrative rules. Mostly she does use like kind of a close third person point of view where like you're with the thoughts of the person who's, in the scene. But in that scene where Salome Otterborn is telling Race and Simon and Poirot what she saw, she writes it like something poked through the window, but none of the men noticed it, right? Like she does this overhead kind of view, which is really interesting because she doesn't do that at any other point in the book. But she creates this kind of suspense because you as the reader are now privy to information that no one else has.
So do we give buckets to this? Is this how this works?
I don't know if I necessarily, because I don't want to slam the movie. I feel like every book/movie we're going to be doing, no movie really does a book justice. Can we just all agree with that right now?
Yeah.
They're completely two different platforms, two different mediums. I enjoyed the audiobook immensely. I cannot say that enough. If I could give that 5 buckets, I would. The movie, if I was going to give it buckets, I enjoyed it at 3.5.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem. It's like, too, is like as the reader, you're going into the film with like this breadth of knowledge behind you,
right.
That you don't have.
That may or may not play out the way it does in a book. That's the other thing too.
Right.
I mean, I know some of the other books that we're going to be covering in this series, the movies pale.
Now, the question is, though, we have to all ask ourselves this. If we hadn't read the book, this is probably very difficult for you to imagine, Christina, but if we hadn't read the book, would our buckets be drastically different for this movie?
Probably. I'd be comparing it to Knives Out. And I feel that Knives Out is a superior movie. It's got more likable characters. There's more motivation because it's a family drama. I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect. You're told that these people have issues with Lynette, whether it's, finances or, you're a cousin or whatever, you're a jilted girlfriend. But like in Lives Out, you see that all unfold because it's family drama. It's family dynamics. You see them infighting. You see them all yelling and screaming at each other. They all have very strong personalities. So, yeah, I would probably give this lower.
I think I would give it higher if I hadn't read the book.
Because you wouldn't know who the killer was.
I wouldn't know who the killer was. And I'm going to give 3 buckets for the film. And I understand this movie as it is over 2 hours long. You don't have the luxury of time that a book has to unfold its characters. There's a very strong palette of characters, as I said before, in the book. And I know it would be impossible to really fully translate that onto the screen, but still, as a reader, you're missing those character traits and you're seeing all those differences and you're kind of mourning what you really took away and what you really liked from the book. So I think my buckets decrease because maybe I would have given it 3.5. Maybe I would have gone higher if I hadn't read the book. But like, as we said, a movie very rarely will shine compared to its source material. So, and I think that's the case here.
I think what I usually try to judge on is, does the film match the spirit of the book? Like, rather than say, does it, like I said, perfectly transcribe every single thing from a book? Does it sort of meet the spirit of the book where it's at? And I think this film does try to meet the spirit of the book where it's at. I actually like Branagh's depiction of Poirot. He is different from Suchet. Obviously, he's different from Ustinov, who is, for me, just okay. I'm not a fan of Albert Finney's version, even though that is a revered film by a lot of people. And there's been other people who've played him. John Malkovich played Poirot in the ABC Murders for an Amazon version, and I can't even watch it because I can't look at him and see Poirot. I can only see John Malkovich, you know? Whereas I think Ken Branagh does a good enough job that you think he's Poirot. You're not thinking the whole time that's Ken Branagh. You know what I mean? I think that he's good in this part. So is it a perfect depiction? No. But I think it meets the spirit of the book, and I think they kind of do the best that they can. As you point out, Jim, it's like 2 hours and I think 5 minutes long.
Yeah.
Roughly. The 78 version is 2 hours and 20, and they still cut a ton of stuff. So I just think you're not going to get to it all.
No, only 6.5 hours shorter than the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this was fun. I really enjoyed this. You guys put me on my toes, making me read books here. We'll do it again.
So the next one we're doing is in what? 4 weeks time?
Yeah.
Something like that. I will tell you, we're right now upstate and we had no internet connection, so no TV, nothing. And so we just curled up and read books. And at one point I look over and my wife is just staring at me. And she goes, I can't remember the last time you just like curled up on a couch with us reading together. And she goes, this is so hot. And I'm like, well, maybe I got to start spending more time reading books.
She didn't notice it was upside down, and that's the reaction that you were looking for.
Well, when she talks to me, at least I can pause the TV show. When I'm reading the book, I'm like, shh, I'm reading. And there was no pictures, Jim.
No pictures.
Usually my books have pictures in them, but I am enjoying this, so we will be doing it again.
Yeah.
And hopefully if you listened, you'll enjoy it. And
so actually let's present this to our listeners. So if you want to play along, the next book club will be in the second week of March. We're doing Christine by Stephen King. So if you want to, you have like a few weeks now, if you want to try to jump in and read along with us.
There you go. It's a big book, by the way.
And as Jeff says, if you've got 22 hours, get the audiobook.
Yeah, 22 hours.
Well,
Stephen King goes down some rabbit holes.
I don't know what other people do with audiobooks, but I tend to listen to audiobooks when I'm doing something else. Like I do a lot of walking errands. So I listen to
I can't see because if it's a really good book, and I love the book, Christine, you can't put it down. So I would imagine it's the same as the audiobook. You can't take those headphones off. You can't take those earbuds out.
It is tough. It is tough to, because I could have gotten them from the library, the audiobooks on CD. And my wife's like, just listen to them in the car. And I'm like, I'm in the car for 12 minutes.
Yeah.
To and from work. I can't listen to let a story unfold in 12-minute intervals. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean,
even reading, I see exactly what Jim says, which is, I'm exhausted. I'm laying here in front of the fireplace last night. I can see the end of the book. I'm like 100 pages away, and I'm like, oh, I got 3 more pages for this next chapter. And all of a sudden I'm 5 chapters later.
It's funny you say that, because the visual aspect of, I made it halfway through this book already, and you can look at where your bookmark is. I'm very proud of myself for making it that
far. My
far.
wife was proud of me. She goes, I can't believe how far you read. I was like, well, I need to finish it for the homework. I got to take it back to the library March 4th.
The thing about an audiobook for me is that, sometimes I can't sit and read, but I can put my headphones in while I'm cleaning the house or cooking dinner or going to the store or going for a long run and all these things that I do. So actually for me, having audiobooks sort of extends my reading life in a way, because you don't always have time to sit down.
I never do. That's the problem. It was tough working. Actually physically working and trying to listen.
Because you're so caught up.
Yeah. I got to pay attention. I got safety rules to follow.
So what are we doing next week on this show?
Next week, Uncharted?
Next week is Uncharted.
Uncharted. Tom Holland and...
one of the Wahlbergs.
Mark Wahlberg. Yes, Uncharted. That is what we're doing. And what are we pairing that up with? After watching the trailer, I think that Goonies would have been perfect, but we're not doing Goonies. We are doing National Treasure, Nicolas Cage. This is a movie that we watched a lot with my kids. This is a fun little romp.
All right. I haven't seen it in a long time.
If you got to take Nicolas Cage in small doses, this is probably a good choice.
But unfortunately, Christina's not joining us next week.
I will be off with my family doing family things.
But she will return.
She
will return.
I shall be back. Like below.
Hopefully you will return as well next week with
please.
Uncharted and National Treasure.
Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Hello, everybody. If you liked the podcast you just heard, then please follow TMI on all of our social media outlets. First and foremost, email us at tmipodcast2018@gmail.com. That is tmipodcast2018@gmail.com.
And you can follow us on Twitter at TMI_podcast2018. Stop over, say hi, give us a compliment. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Make sure you follow us on Instagram as well, which is also TMI_podcast2018.
And of course, we are on Facebook, facebook.com/TMI Podcast 2018. And it should be noted, we also have a community page, so join the forum.
And if you like to watch YouTube, you can see us at TMI Podcast 2018, all one word. Look for the popcorn bucket.
Popcorn bucket. Or you could just go to our website, which has every link there, TMIConfessionalspodcast.com. And we'll see you at the concession stand.
We'll save some popcorn for you.
I am a Hercule Poirot, and I dissolve everything.